In a quiet northern town, an old woman was left in the forest to die because she saw something she should never have seen. The criminals believed the woods would keep their secret forever. But they forgot one thing: a loyal German shepherd who refused to abandon the woman who raised him. Injured and exhausted, the dog ran through the night to find the only man who might still stand for justice. A former Navy SEAL who thought his days of fighting were over, until that dog appeared at his door. What they discovered together would expose a truth that shocked an entire town. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from, share your thoughts after the story, and please like and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers so we can keep bringing you more stories like this. Morning came softly to the northern lake country, as if the land had learned long ago that harsh things should never arrive all at once. Sunlight slid through the white trunks of birch trees in long, pale ribbons. The air held the clean scent of cold water, pine resin, and damp earth warming after night. Somewhere beyond the tree line, the lake breathed against its rocky shore with a passionate hush, and from the little town below came the faint clink of someone opening a bait shop, the distant rumble of an old pickup, the ordinary music of people beginning another day they expected to understand. At the edge of the forest, where the gravel road gave up trying to be civilized and became little more than two worn tracks between weeds, Asher Wren stood on the porch of his cabin with a mug of black coffee cooling in his hand. He was 40 years old and built like a man who had spent years carrying weight no one else noticed. At just over 6'2", he had the kind of height that made old door frames look small, but there was nothing boastful about him. He was lean, compact, and hard in the way of men who had learned to keep themselves useful rather than impressive. His face was clean-shaven, the square lines of his form and the strong planes of his cheekbones left bare to the morning light. His dark brown hair was cut in a military style, short and practical, though a little longer than regulation now, softened by civilian neglect. His skin was fair beneath the weathering of northern wind and long seasons outdoors. His eyes, gray-blue and steady, were the sort that made people feel seen more clearly than they preferred. He wore the same clothes he wore nearly every day, an old olive-gray tactical combat shirt faded at the shoulders and frayed at the cuffs, worn earth-brown combat pants with softened knees and sagging cargo pockets, old military work boots and a battered watch on his wrist that had outlasted too much. He lived alone. That was not the same as saying he preferred it. Below the porch steps, a stack of split wood waited to be moved. A section of fence near the back lot leaned inward, where frost and time had made allies of each other. There was always something to mend, which suited Asher. Repair was honest work. Wood did not lie. Nails did not ask questions. If something was broken, it stayed broken until a hand chose otherwise. People in town knew pieces of him, never the whole shape. They knew he kept to himself. They knew he worked hard and spoke little. They knew he had once been a Navy SEAL because small towns collect facts the way old coats collect burrs. But no one with decent manners asked him about it twice. There was a reserve in him that did not invite curiosity. It was not cruelty. It was weariness arranged into discipline. Years earlier, one mission had gone wrong in the kind of way that leaves no clean edges behind. His closest friend, Owen Halbrook, had not come home. Asher had. Something in him had closed after that. Not all at once, but with the slow precision of winter icing over a lake. He left the service. He drifted north. He rented the old cabin where maps began to lose interest. And little by little, he built a life so quiet it almost looked like forgiveness from a distance. Almost. He took a sip of coffee and looked toward the birches. Nothing was wrong, yet a strange restlessness moved through him, light as a draft beneath a door. He ignored it. That was what men like Asher did with feelings they could not file, label, or solve. By the time the sun had climbed higher, he had already fixed half the loose boards near the shed and hauled a bundle of brush away from the drainage ditch. The work steadied him. Sweat gathered beneath the collar of his shirt. A blue jay scolded him from a branch overhead, as if offended by the noise. Somewhere far off, he heard a dog barking, then silence again. Across the lake and nearer to town, June Halbrook was beginning her morning walk. June was 74, small-framed and silver-haired, with the kind of face age had not defeated so much as carefully rewritten. Her skin was pale and lined, The lines gathered most deeply around her eyes and mouth, where a lifetime of smiling, grieving, enduring, and beginning again had left its signature. She wore her white hair tied low at the nape of her neck, practical and neat, and even in retirement she moved with a quiet dignity that made younger people step aside for her without knowing why. That morning she wore a navy wool coat, old but well cared for, a cream scarf, dark slacks, and sturdy walking shoes meant for wet ground and gravel. June had once been the sort of woman who filled a house simply by entering it. Grief had made her smaller in some ways, but it had not made her weak. Her son Owen had inherited his stubbornness from her and his kindness from his late father. When Owen died overseas, something essential in her life had been torn free. Yet life, like a rude neighbor, had kept knocking. Meals still had to be cooked. Mail still arrived. Snow still needed shoveling. So she had gone on. She did not go on alone. Atlas walked at her side. He was a 9-year-old German shepherd with a black and tan coat dark across the saddle and burnished gold along the chest and legs, like he had been brushed in old bronze and shadow. His body still carried the strength of a working dog, broad chest, sturdy shoulders, disciplined gait, though age had begun to write its own quieter truce into him. A faint scar marked his left shoulder beneath the fur. His ears stood alert, his muzzle noble and long, and his amber-brown eyes held an intelligence that was not human and somehow felt deeper because of it. Around his neck hung an old leather collar with a worn metal K9 tag that clicked softly when he moved. Atlas had served beside Owen once. After Owen's death, the dog had come home to June, and in the years since, they had become less like owner and pet than two survivors sharing the same silence. Atlas was gentle with her, watchful around strangers, and uncannily sensitive to moods. Some mornings he walked with the ease of habit. Some mornings he seemed to listen to things the world had not yet admitted aloud. This was one of those mornings. June noticed it almost at once. Atlas's stride shortened, his head lifted, his ears angled toward the trees beyond the road. "What is it, handsome?" she asked softly. His tail did not wag. The narrow trail they followed curved near a stand of pines and then dipped toward an overgrown service road that paralleled the highway for half a mile before disappearing into brush. It was not a place many people used anymore. Too muddy in spring, too lonely in the off-season. June usually liked that about it. Today the stillness felt arranged. She slowed. Through the trees she saw the flash of white paint, unnatural against all the green and the brown. At first she thought ambulance. Then she thought no, something close to it, but wrong in the details. The vehicle stood half hidden beside a refrigerated box truck parked near the old service road. No clear logo, no county markings she recognized. Two men moved between the vehicles with the brisk efficiency of people doing something they did not want watched. Between them, on a stretcher, lay a young man. Even from that distance, June could tell he was not dead. One arm slipped loosely toward the gravel. His fingers twitched. Atlas gave a low sound in his throat. Not quite a growl, not quite a whine. June froze behind a cluster of spruce saplings, her heart kicking once, hard. One of the men was tall and thick through the neck, wearing dark utility clothes and gloves. The other was leaner, quick in his movements, the sort of man whose politeness would probably feel rehearsed. Neither wore a proper uniform. The stretcher disappeared into the rear of the white vehicle. June felt the old instinct of a mother rise in her, a sharp, immediate need to do something, followed almost instantly by the colder instinct of age. Do not move too fast when danger has not finished showing its face. Atlas stared without blinking. Then he did something that made the skin rise along June's arms. He stepped in front of her, not casually, not protectively in the ordinary way dogs sometimes do. He placed himself between her and the road with the exact deliberate posture of a trained partner reading threat. For one strange second, June felt the years fold in on themselves. She could almost see Owen again at 23, laughing in fatigues in her kitchen, kneeling to clip a leash, telling her, "Atlas doesn't panic. If he plants himself, pay attention." The memory struck so cleanly it nearly took her breath. That was the rehook life placed in her path that morning. Not thunder, not a voice from heaven, only a dog standing where her dead son once would have stood, as if loyalty had outlived death and borrowed fur instead of flesh. June swallowed. All right, she whispered. We're going. She tugged the leash lightly and turned as naturally as she could, forcing her pace into something ordinary. Not hurried, not hesitant, just an old woman and her dog walking home through northern sunlight. But halfway up the trail, she made the mistake of looking back. The lean man had turned. Even at a distance, she knew when a stranger's attention sharpened into recognition. He had seen her. June kept walking. Atlas matched her pace, though every muscle in him looked coiled. By the time they reached the wider path near the road, her mouth had gone dry. She told herself not to imagine things. Perhaps it was a private medical transfer. Perhaps the man on the stretcher was a patient being moved somewhere better equipped. Perhaps there was a harmless explanation for the missing logos, the hidden road, the nervous speed of it all. But the human heart is not easily fooled when the body has already understood the danger. Back at her house, a modest place with flower boxes under the windows and a porch swing Owen had built years earlier, June locked the front door and set her purse down with hands steadier than she felt. Atlas did not go to his water bowl. He did not lie on the rug near the kitchen table. Instead, he moved from window to window, silent, alert, his nails ticking softly on the hardwood. June stood at the sink and looked out over the yard where the lilacs were beginning to bloom. Call the sheriff, she thought. And then what? She answered herself. Tell them she had seen a strange vehicle in the trees? Tell them a dog did not like the smell of it? At her age, one becomes too familiar with the particular smile people wear when they want to be respectful toward fear they secretly consider exaggerated. Still, something was wrong. She poured water into the kettle and forgot to light the stove. Across the lake, Asher paused while lifting a post brace into place. He did not know why he stopped. The morning had remained bright, almost offensively beautiful in its innocence. Yet that restlessness had returned, heavier now, like a hand settling on the back of his neck. He straightened slowly and looked toward the line of distant trees beyond the water. Nothing moved there that he could see. But somewhere beneath all the quiet, the day had shifted. And neither he nor June yet knew that the shift had already chosen them. By late afternoon, the quiet around June Halbrook's house had begun to feel less like peace and more like waiting. The little home sat on a gentle rise outside town, its white paint weathered by decades of wind coming off the lake. Flower boxes beneath the windows held lilacs that had just begun to bloom, their scent drifting faintly through the open kitchen window. The place had always been modest but warm. Handmade curtains, wooden shelves Owen had built when he was young, photographs of fishing trips and school plays arranged carefully along the hallway wall. June stood at the kitchen sink longer than she needed to, staring out across the yard. Her hands rested lightly on the edge of the counter, but her fingers tapped faintly against the wood without her noticing. Atlas sat near the door. He was not lying down, not pacing, not restless in the way dogs sometimes become when they want to go outside. Instead, he held himself very still, his body angled toward the back of the house as if listening to something too faint for human ears. The golden fur along his neck rose slightly and settled again. June finally turned off the kettle she had forgotten to boil. The silence inside the house had grown uncomfortable. "You're making me nervous," she told the dog gently. Atlas glanced toward her. His amber eyes held the steady patience of an animal that had once been trained to wait for commands in places far more dangerous than a quiet kitchen. He had spent years learning to read human breath, tension, hesitation. Even now, long after the military handler who first taught him those lessons was gone, the instincts remained. June reached down and scratched the fur behind his ear. "You think I should have called someone?" Atlas did not move. The old woman sighed. At 74, June Halbrook had learned that intuition was a language people often ignored until it spoke too loudly to dismiss. Yet she also understood something younger people rarely did. The world was full of strange moments that meant nothing at all. Perhaps the young man on that stretcher had been ill. Perhaps the vehicles belonged to a private medical company she simply didn't recognize. Perhaps. The thought broke apart when Atlas suddenly rose to his feet. His head turned sharply toward the back of the house. His ears lifted. The movement was so abrupt that June's chest tightened. "What is it?" Atlas did not bark. He walked to the rear hallway and stopped there, his body angled toward the door that opened onto the small back porch. His nose lifted, drawing in the air through slow, careful breaths. June felt something cold move through her stomach. The afternoon sun still lay across the yard outside, but the quiet no longer felt innocent. She forced herself to laugh softly. "You're imagining things," she said, though she wasn't sure which of them she meant. Atlas lowered his head slightly. Then he gave a low sound, not quite a growl, not quite a warning. June's fingers tightened around the dish towel in her hands. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then a car passed somewhere along the distant road. The moment loosened. Atlas slowly relaxed his shoulders, though he did not leave the hallway. June shook her head. "You've got me jumping at shadows now." She finished drying the last plate and placed it on the rack beside the sink. Outside, the sun slid lower through the birches, turning the yard golden. The ordinary rhythm of evening slowly returned. She fed Atlas. She watered the flowers on the porch. She locked the front door, a habit she had formed after Owen left for the military years ago, and insisted she start taking small precautions. By 8 o'clock, the sky above the lake had deepened into soft violet. Inside the house, lamplight glowed warmly across the living room. June sat in her armchair with a book she had read 3 times already, though she turned the pages slowly as if the words might surprise her this time. Atlas lay nearby on the braided rug, yet even resting, the dog did not quite sleep. His ears twitched occasionally. His breathing remained light and ready. June finally closed the book. "I suppose we're both tired," she murmured. She turned off the lamp. The house settled into darkness. The night deepened quietly over the lake country. Wind moved through the birches in long whispers. Somewhere far away, a boat engine faded across the water. Crickets began their steady music beneath the grass. Inside June's house, Atlas suddenly lifted his head. He had been sleeping lightly, his body curled but never fully surrendered to rest. Now every muscle in him sharpened. The sound was small, a faint metallic scrape, not inside the house, outside, near the back porch. Atlas rose slowly. He did not bark. Years of training had taught him that noise often helped the wrong people. He padded silently across the floor toward the hallway. In her bedroom, June stirred. She opened her eyes in the dark. Something had woken her, though she couldn't yet say what. The old house creaked occasionally when the temperature changed, but this sound had been different, deliberate, careful. She swung her legs slowly over the side of the bed. "Atlas?" she called softly. The dog stood in the hallway, staring toward the back door. June stepped out of the bedroom. The hallway light flicked on with a small click. For a moment, everything seemed normal. Then the light went out. The house plunged into darkness again. June froze. Outside, a man's voice whispered something too low to understand. Atlas's body shifted instantly into a defensive stance. The back door handle moved. June's heart began pounding. She stepped backward instinctively, her hand reaching toward the kitchen counter where the old cordless phone rested. The door burst inward. 2 men moved through the doorway with swift, practiced motion. The first was tall and broad-shouldered, his face shadowed beneath a dark cap. His jaw carried the heavy stubble of someone who shaved irregularly, and the hard lines around his mouth suggested a temper, sharpened by years of impatience. His arms were thick with muscle beneath a black work jacket. The second man was leaner, younger perhaps by a decade. His hair was cut short, and his narrow face held the watchful expression of someone who had spent a long time learning how to remain unnoticed. He wore medical gloves and carried a roll of duct tape in one hand. For half a second, the 3 of them simply stared at one another. Atlas moved first. The German shepherd launched forward with explosive speed. His teeth clamped onto the broad man's forearm before the man could react. The attacker cursed loudly and swung his arm, trying to shake the dog loose. "Get him off!" the man shouted. The second man stepped forward quickly, bringing a metal rod down hard against Atlas's shoulder. The impact echoed through the kitchen. Atlas yelped, but did not release his grip immediately. June cried out. The rod came down again. This time Atlas lost his hold and stumbled sideways. The broad man kicked at the dog viciously. "Damn animal!" The lean man moved past them both, reaching June before she could reach the phone. "Sorry about this, ma'am," he said calmly, though his eyes held no apology at all. He twisted her arms behind her back with practiced efficiency. June struggled. For a 74-year-old woman, she fought harder than either man expected, her heel catching the lean man's shin hard enough to make him grunt. "Hold still," he snapped. Tape sealed over her mouth. Rope tightened around her wrists. Atlas staggered to his feet again. Blood darkened the fur along his shoulder. Yet he stepped forward once more. The broad man raised the rod again. This time the blow struck Atlas's ribs. The dog collapsed against the cabinet. June's cry came out muffled beneath the tape. "Enough," the lean man said impatiently. "We don't have time." The broad man wiped sweat from his forehead. "What about the dog?" The lean man glanced at Atlas, who lay breathing heavily but still conscious. "Leave it. It won't matter." They dragged June toward the door. Her feet scraped helplessly across the kitchen floor. Atlas forced himself upright again. Pain flared through his body with every breath, but something older than pain moved him now. The broad man turned just in time to see the dog charging again. He swung the rod once more. The strike caught Atlas across the side of his neck. The dog collapsed hard against the wall. June's eyes filled with tears. The attackers hauled her outside. The night swallowed them. For several seconds, the house remained silent except for Atlas's strained breathing. Then the dog slowly lifted his head. The back door hung open. Cold air drifted inside. Atlas staggered forward. Outside, the attackers shoved June into a heavy canvas sack near the back of a van parked beyond the trees. The lean man tightened the rope quickly. "Witness problem solved," he muttered. They loaded the sack into the vehicle. The engine started. Headlights swept briefly across the yard before the van disappeared down the narrow dirt road leading into the forest. Atlas stood at the edge of the porch, watching the red glow of the taillights vanish. He tried to follow. His injured leg buckled beneath him. He collapsed into the grass. For a moment, the world narrowed to pain and the fading smell of engine exhaust. But slowly, the dog lifted his head again. The scent remained, June's scent. It drifted through the trees toward the deeper forest. Atlas rose unsteadily. He began to follow. Halfway along the forest path, Atlas suddenly stopped. He lowered his nose to the ground and inhaled again. The scent of the van continued ahead, but beneath it, fainter, older, lay another trail, a scent he had not followed in years, one that belonged to a place where a different man had once laughed beside a cabin door. Atlas lifted his head. For a moment, he simply stood there, beneath the tall pines, breathing the night air. Then, instead of continuing after the van, the old K9 turned away from the road entirely and began limping north through the trees. The moon rose higher above the lake as the dog moved deeper into the forest. Pain slowed him. Blood darkened the fur along his shoulder. Yet he continued forward with stubborn determination. The forest gradually changed as he traveled. The scent of marsh grass faded. The soil grew drier beneath the pines. The trail he followed was not one a human could easily see. But Atlas did not need to see it. Memory guided him. Years earlier, he had run these woods beside Owen Halbrook and another man, training exercise, long hikes, quiet weekends when the two soldiers had laughed more than they spoke. Dogs do not forget places where their pack once felt whole. At last, the trees thinned. A faint line of gravel appeared ahead. Beyond it stood a small cabin. Atlas paused at the edge of the clearing. The lights inside were dark. The old K9 gathered the last of his strength. Then he stepped forward toward the porch. Dawn had not yet fully claimed the northern woods when the first gray light slipped across the clearing around Asher Wren's cabin. The night air still held its cold edge. Pine branches moved slowly above the roofline, and somewhere down the slope, the lake murmured softly against stone. A faint mist hovered just above the ground, the kind that formed when warm summer air met the stubborn chill that northern water refused to surrender. Inside the cabin, Asher Wren woke before the alarm he rarely used. Years of military discipline had left him with a strange relationship to sleep. He rested when his body allowed it, not when clocks insisted. Even now, several years removed from service, he still woke early, often just before sunrise, when the world was quiet enough to think without interruption. He sat up slowly on the narrow bed. For a moment he listened. The cabin was small, a single-story structure built decades earlier by someone who understood winters well. Wood walls, iron stove, sturdy beams, and a porch that creaked slightly in cold weather. It was not much, but it was honest. The kind of place a man could repair without asking anyone's permission. Asher swung his legs to the floor. He ran a hand through his dark hair, the military cut still neat though longer than regulation now. His face remained clean-shaven, the sharp lines of his jaw visible in the pale light leaking through the window. His gray-blue eyes carried the distant focus of someone who had learned to observe the world first and react later. Something had woken him. At first he thought it might be wind. Then he heard it again. A soft scraping sound against the wooden porch, not loud, not urgent, but persistent. Asher stood. He pulled on his old olive-gray tactical shirt and stepped quietly toward the door. Men who had spent years operating in uncertain environments rarely rushed toward unfamiliar sounds. Instead, they approached with patience, each step deliberate, every sense awake. The scraping came again, this time followed by a faint, low breath. Asher unlocked the door and opened it slowly. At first, he saw nothing. Then his eyes adjusted to the dim light. A large shape lay near the porch steps. The dog did not move. For half a second, Asher's mind sorted through possibilities. Wild animal, injured stray, something dragged in from the woods. Then the shape lifted its head. Amber eyes met his. Recognition struck instantly. Atlas! The name left his mouth before he realized he had spoken. The German shepherd struggled to stand. Even through the dim light, Asher could see the damage. The dog's black and tan coat was matted with dirt and streaked with dark blood along the shoulder. One hind leg trembled under his weight. His breathing came fast but steady. Atlas was older now, 9 years at least, but the powerful build of a working dog still showed beneath the exhaustion. His broad chest rose and fell in sharp breaths, and the old K9 tag on his leather collar clinked softly as he moved. Asher stepped forward immediately. Easy, he said quietly. Atlas did not wag his tail. He simply stared. Something in the dog's expression made Asher's stomach tighten. Animals that had served beside soldiers carried a different kind of awareness. Atlas had once worked alongside Owen Halbrook during search operations. Asher had seen that dog read danger faster than most men. Now that same focus burned in his eyes. Asher crouched beside him. His hands moved automatically, the same calm efficiency that had treated wounds in far harsher places. He checked Atlas's shoulder first, then the ribs. Someone did this to you. The words came out flat. Atlas shifted slightly but did not pull away. His eyes remained locked on Asher's face. Asher examined the injuries more closely. A deep bruise across the ribs. A cut along the shoulder muscle. Nothing immediately fatal, but enough to slow the dog badly. Hold still, Asher murmured. He stepped back inside the cabin and returned with a small medical kit, leftover supplies from years of habit, antiseptic wipes, gauze, tape. Atlas endured the cleaning without protest. Every few seconds, however, he turned his head toward the forest. Not casually, not out of curiosity, out of urgency. Asher noticed. Something out there? Atlas gave a low sound, not a bark, a warning. The sound pulled a memory from somewhere Asher had tried not to revisit. He saw Owen again in his mind, young, laughing, kneeling beside the same dog during training drills years ago. If Atlas pushes you somewhere, Owen had once said, pay attention. He doesn't guess. Asher finished wrapping the wound. Atlas immediately stood. The movement was clumsy but determined. He turned toward the tree line. Then he looked back at Asher. For several seconds, the two of them held each other's gaze. Men like Asher did not believe easily in fate, but sometimes life arranged moments too precise to ignore. Atlas took 2 steps toward the forest. Then he stopped. He waited. Instead of continuing forward, Atlas walked back toward the porch. He placed one heavy paw gently against Asher's boot. Not scratching, not begging, simply pressing there, as if anchoring him. Then the old dog looked up again. In that quiet morning light, something in his eyes carried an unspoken message so clear it almost felt human. Come. The request did not come from fear. It came from duty. And for the first time in years, Asher Wren felt the old weight of responsibility settle back onto his shoulders. He grabbed his jacket without thinking. Years of experience had taught him one rule above all others. When a trained animal arrives injured and refuses to leave without you, something has already gone very wrong. Asher locked the cabin door behind him. Atlas had already begun moving down the narrow trail leading into the woods. The dog's limp slowed him, but his direction never wavered. They moved through the birch trees together. Morning gradually brightened around them. Birds began calling from the branches overhead, unaware of the urgency threading through the quiet forest path. Asher followed several paces behind, watching Atlas carefully. The dog's nose moved constantly across the ground. Every few yards, he paused to confirm something invisible before continuing. After 15 minutes, the trail crossed a shallow drainage ditch. Atlas stopped. He sniffed the mud. Asher stepped closer. Fresh tire tracks cut through the dirt, not the usual narrow prints left by pickup trucks or farm vehicles. These were wider, heavier, likely a commercial van or ambulance. Asher crouched beside them. His fingers brushed the edge of the track. Still Sahyon? Recent. Atlas gave another low sound. The dog turned and continued deeper into the trees. The forest changed gradually as they walked. The ground grew wetter, the scent of marsh grass mixing with pine. Sunlight filtered through thicker branches, turning the path into a shifting pattern of gold and shadow. After another half-mile, Atlas slowed. His breathing grew heavier. Asher placed a hand gently on the dog's shoulder. "That's enough if you need to stop." Atlas ignored him. He pushed forward a few more steps. Then he froze. Ahead, something pale lay half-hidden among fallen leaves. Asher moved closer. It was a strip of gray duct tape, not unusual in itself, but it had been torn recently. The adhesive still clung to bits of fabric. Asher's jaw tightened. Atlas moved again. They followed the trail downhill toward a narrow stream winding between rocks. The dog's steps faltered now. The pain in his ribs had begun catching with each breath, but he did not stop. Finally, the trees opened slightly around a small clearing near the water. Atlas walked straight to the center of it. Then he stopped. His nose lowered slowly toward the ground. Asher approached cautiously. Something large had been dragged across the dirt here. The disturbed soil formed a clear path through the leaves. Asher followed it with his eyes. The trail ended beside a heavy canvas sack lying partially hidden near the base of a fallen tree. The fabric moved, only slightly, but unmistakably. Atlas let out a sharp bark. Asher ran forward. His knife flashed from the sheath at his belt. The blade sliced through the rope binding the sack. Inside, June Halbrook gasped for air as the canvas opened and sunlight flooded in. Her face was pale beneath the gray strands of hair clinging to her temples. For a moment, she stared up at the man kneeling over her. Recognition came slowly. "Asher?" Her voice was barely more than a whisper. Atlas collapsed beside Ear, exhausted but finally still. The forest around them remained quiet, but the morning had changed completely. Morning settled slowly over the northern woods. Sunlight filtered through the tall birch trees surrounding Asher Wren's cabin, scattering pale gold across the wooden porch and the gravel path that wound down toward the lake. The quiet here was the kind that most people search for their entire lives. Wind brushing softly through branches, distant water lapping against stone, and the occasional call of a loon echoing across the valley. Yet inside the cabin, peace felt like a fragile illusion. June Halbrook sat wrapped in a thick wool blanket near the window, her frail shoulders trembling faintly each time she inhaled. The warmth of the room had begun returning color to her face, but the exhaustion in her eyes told the deeper story of what she had survived. Across from her, Atlas lay stretched across the braided rug. The German shepherd's breathing had steadied, though each rise of his ribs revealed the effort it required. The dog's black and tan coat, once thick and proud, was matted in places where blood had dried along his shoulder. Age had softened the sharp edges of his strength, but not the quiet determination that still lived in him. He had not taken his eyes off June. Not once. Asher stood near the kitchen counter, hands braced against the worn wood as he watched both of them. At 36 years old, Asher Wren carried the physical discipline of a Navy SEAL long after leaving the service. He stood tall, nearly 6'2", with a lean, hardened build shaped by years of training and survival rather than vanity. His dark brown hair remained cut in a military style, slightly longer than regulation now, and his clean-shaven jaw revealed the sharp lines of a man accustomed to making decisions under pressure. But the calm in his gray-blue eyes had changed. Not gone, just sharpened. The quiet life he had built in these woods had been carefully chosen. A place far from the chaos he once knew. A place where memories could fade into the rhythm of ordinary days. Yet now those memories had come walking back to his door on four injured legs. Atlas shifted slightly, letting out a low breath. June reached down instinctively and rested a trembling hand on the dog's head. "Still watching over me," she whispered. Her voice carried the softness of someone who had lived long enough to understand loyalty when she saw it. Asher moved toward the stove, filling a kettle with water. "You need to drink something warm," he said quietly. June gave a tired smile, still giving orders like a soldier. He didn't answer that, because some habits never truly left. A gravel crunch sounded outside. Atlas's ears lifted immediately. The dog didn't rise. The pain in his ribs wouldn't allow it, but his entire body shifted into alertness. Asher moved to the window. A dark green station wagon climbed the gravel path toward the cabin, dust trailing behind it in the sunlight. The driver's door opened first. Mara Bell stepped out. At 38, Mara had the steady confidence of someone who had spent most of her life caring for creatures that could not speak for themselves. She was tall and lean, with strong shoulders and practical movements that came from years of work rather than exercise. Her ash-brown hair was pulled into a loose knot, and faint freckles dotted her fair skin, souvenirs from long days outdoors. She carried a heavy veterinary bag as if it weighed nothing. From the passenger side, Dr. Lydia Barrett stepped out more slowly. Where Mara moved with quiet speed, Lydia carried the deliberate precision of experience. In her early 70s, the retired physician had a thin frame and sharp features softened by time but not by uncertainty. Her silver hair was cut neatly around her ears, and the intelligent gray eyes behind her glasses missed very little. Together, the two women climbed the porch steps. Mara entered first. The moment she saw Atlas, her expression changed. "Oh my God," she breathed softly. She knelt beside the dog immediately, her hands moving gently along his shoulder and ribs. Atlas lifted his head slightly in recognition. "Easy, boy," she murmured. Her fingers examined the bruising carefully. "Blunt trauma. Maybe a cracked rib," she said quietly. Asher nodded once. "Two men." Mara glanced up at him. "That obvious?" "Atlas doesn't lose fights with one." She gave a faint smile at that. Meanwhile, Lydia moved directly to June. "Let's see what trouble you've gotten yourself into," the doctor said calmly. June chuckled weakly. "Nice to see you too, Lydia." Lydia's hands worked quickly, checking June's pulse and the bruising around her wrists. "You're dehydrated, mildly concussed, and badly shaken," Lydia concluded. "I've been worse." Lydia gave her a long look. "I doubt that." For a while, the cabin filled with quiet work. Mara cleaned Atlas's wounds carefully, trimming away fur around the injury and applying antiseptic. Atlas endured the process with the patience of a dog who had spent years trusting human hands to help him through pain. June sipped on a warm tea Lydia insisted she drink. Asher stood nearby, watching the room with the steady awareness that never quite faded in soldiers who had survived too much. Finally, Lydia spoke. "Tell us what happened." June stared down into her cup for a long moment. Her voice was thin when she answered. "I went walking yesterday morning, along the service road." Atlas shifted slightly beside her chair. June's hand drifted automatically to the dog's head. "There were two trucks in the trees," she continued slowly, "a white transport van and another vehicle with refrigeration panels." Mara frowned. "Medical transport." "That's what I thought." June's fingers tightened around the cup. "But the men, they weren't careful with the boy on the stretcher." The room went very still. Asher's voice remained quiet. "What boy?" "Late 20s, maybe. Unconscious." June swallowed hard. They were arguing about timing, about delivery. Lydia's brow creased. "That doesn't sound like a hospital transfer." "No," June whispered. "It didn't." Atlas suddenly lifted his head. His ears turned toward the door. For a moment, the old dog stared at the sunlight spilling through the window, as if seeing something far beyond the trees. Then he slowly rose onto his feet. Pain rippled through his injured ribs, but Atlas ignored it. He limped across the room, stopped in front of Asher, and gently nudged the man's hand. Not once, twice. The same signal he had used years ago during search operations. the silent request for attention before revealing something important. Asher felt a strange chill move through him, because Atlas had only ever used that signal for one reason, when a scent led somewhere dangerous. June continued speaking, unaware of the quiet tension that had filled the room. One of the men had a tattoo, she said slowly, an anchor, but crossed out. Asher's eyes narrowed slightly. Anything else? June hesitated. There was a woman too. I didn't see her clearly, but I smelled her perfume earlier. Strong, sweet. Mara frowned thoughtfully. Orange blossom, maybe? June nodded immediately. Yes. Lydia folded her arms. That's oddly specific. June met her eyes. When someone is about to kill you, details become very clear. The words hung heavily in the room. Then she added something else. One more thing. Asher waited. June's voice dropped almost to a whisper. They said a name. What name? Mara asked. June looked directly at Asher. Caldwell Transit Medical. The words landed like a stone in still water. Asher knew the name. Most of the region did. Caldwell Transit had arrived 6 months earlier, offering private patient transport across rural counties. Their vans were spotless, their staff polite, their advertisements promising compassion and efficiency where hospitals struggled to reach. They had become part of the landscape almost overnight. Mara shook her head slowly. I've seen their vans in town. So have I, Lydia said. June's voice trembled slightly. One of the men said the transfer had to happen before nightfall. Transfer? Asher repeated quietly. June nodded. They laughed when they said I was useless. Atlas shifted beside her chair again. His head rested gently against her knee. The dog's eyes were tired, but steady. Watching. Guarding. Asher turned toward the window. Outside, the northern woods stretched peacefully beneath the morning sun. But the calm now felt deceptive. Because somewhere beyond those trees, men were moving people like cargo, and they believed no one had seen. Asher closed his eyes briefly. He had come to these woods to escape a world full of violence and lies. But the past had a strange way of finding the people who understood it best. When he opened his eyes again, the decision had already formed. He would not ignore this. Not when Owen Halbrook's dog had carried the truth all the way to his door. The sun had climbed higher by the time quiet returned to Asher Wren's cabin. The northern woods seemed almost indifferent to the tension inside the small house. Pine needles whispered in the breeze. Sunlight scattered through birch leaves, and the lake below the ridge shimmered as if the world had decided this morning should belong to peace. Inside, no one believed that lie. June Halbrook slept in the armchair by the window, the blanket still wrapped around her thin shoulders. The lines of pain around her mouth had softened slightly now that the doctor's medicine had begun working. Age had taken much from her strength, but the stubborn endurance that had carried her through decades of life in the northern country still lived beneath the frailty. Atlas remained stretched across the braided rug beside her. The old German shepherd had not fully slept since the attack. Even now, though his breathing was deeper than before, his ears twitched occasionally at small sounds drifting through the forest. Loyalty had its own kind of vigilance. Across the room, Asher sat at the kitchen table with a weathered notebook open in front of him. He had written everything down. Every detail June remembered. The trucks, the tattoo, the woman's perfume, and the name that sat on the page like a stain that would not wash away. Caldwell Transit Medical. Asher leaned back slightly in his chair. Outside, a breeze pushed against the cabin walls. He had seen those vans before. White, polished, professional-looking vehicles that carried patients across rural counties where hospitals were hours away. They had appeared suddenly months ago, offering services no one had questioned because people in remote towns often accepted help without asking too many questions. In places like this, distance made trust easy, and that made deception easier. A soft movement pulled his attention back toward the rug. Atlas was awake. The old dog lifted his head slowly, amber eyes watching Asher across the room. There was no fear in them. Only patience. Asher closed the notebook. You're not finished yet, are you? Atlas blinked once. That was answer enough. The gravel road outside the cabin carried very little traffic. Anyone living in these woods preferred it that way. But by early afternoon, Asher had already made his decision. If Caldwell Transit Medical was moving people through the forest north of town, there would be traces somewhere. Vehicles that large could not vanish completely. He stepped quietly toward June. She stirred slightly when he adjusted the blanket around her shoulders. "Rest," he said softly. Her eyes opened halfway. "You're going somewhere." "Just checking something." June studied him through the haze of fatigue. "You always did have the worst definition of checking." Despite everything, he almost smiled. Atlas stood slowly. The dog's injured ribs protested, but stubbornness carried him to the door. "You're staying," Asher told him. Atlas ignored the command entirely. Some instincts were stronger than orders. The old pickup truck started with the familiar rumble of an engine that had survived decades of northern winters. Atlas climbed carefully into the passenger seat. The road that wound down from the ridge toward town cut through thick forest, passing narrow trails and service paths used mostly by logging crews or hunters during the fall. Asher drove slowly, not because he was unsure of the road, but because he was studying it. Tire tracks told stories if someone knew how to read them. After 20 minutes, the forest opened slightly around an abandoned ranger access road that curved east toward the deeper hills. Asher slowed the truck. Fresh tire marks cut through the dirt, wide tread, commercial vehicle weight. Atlas sat upright suddenly, the dog's ears angled forward, his nose lifted into the air. The reaction was immediate enough that Asher felt a quiet pulse of confirmation. "Yeah," he murmured, "they came through here." He turned the truck onto the narrow path. Branches scraped lightly along the sides as the vehicle moved deeper into the woods. The road grew rougher, older, as if it had not been maintained in years. Eventually the trees opened into a clearing, not large, but large enough for several vehicles to maneuver. The ground was scarred by recent tire tracks, fresh ones. Asher shut off the engine. The silence that followed was heavy. Atlas jumped down from the truck, ignoring the stiffness in his ribs. The dog moved slowly across the clearing, nose close to the ground. Then he stopped. His body stiffened. Asher walked over. "What is it?" Atlas lowered his head toward a patch of disturbed soil. At first it looked like nothing. Then Asher noticed the faint red stains darkening the dirt. Blood. Not much, but enough. He crouched lower, studying the area carefully. Something had happened here recently. A transfer point. Vehicles arriving, something or someone being moved between them. The realization settled cold in his chest. Atlas suddenly began circling the edge of the clearing. His movements were slow but deliberate. Then he stopped near a cluster of fallen branches. The dog began digging, not wildly, carefully, as if uncovering something he had already smelled. Asher stepped closer. Within seconds, Atlas exposed a small object buried beneath the loose dirt, a metal hospital bracelet. The plastic band was smeared with soil, but the printed label remained readable. Patient ID J. Calder. Asher felt the air leave his lungs, because the name meant something. Grant Calder, a retired mechanic from town who had vanished 3 weeks earlier after being scheduled for a long-distance medical transfer. People had assumed complications with paperwork or relocation to a larger hospital in the South. No one had questioned it. Until now. Atlas lifted his head slowly. The dog looked at Asher with the quiet intensity that had guided soldiers through far worse terrain, as if asking the same question both of them now understood. How many others? The sound of an approaching engine cut through the clearing. Asher froze instantly. Atlas lowered himself beside the truck, body tense. A vehicle was coming down the access road. Not fast, carefully. Asher moved behind the trees, watching the path. A white transport van appeared between the branches. The logo on its side was clean and simple. Caldwell Transit Medical. The van rolled into the clearing and stopped. 2 men stepped out. The first was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair shaved close along the sides and heavy stubble covering his jaw. His movements carried the confidence of someone accustomed to physical work. A faded jacket hung loosely from his shoulders, revealing the edge of a tattoo on his wrist. An anchor, but the center of the symbol had been slashed through with a crude line. The second man was younger and thinner, his narrow face framed by sandy blonde hair and pale blue eyes that moved constantly. scanning the forest as if expecting something to go wrong. They spoke quietly near the back of the van. "Next pickup is tonight," the younger one said. "Boss wants everything moved before morning," the other replied. "Caldwell's already nervous." The older man snorted. "He should be. Sheriff's office has been asking questions." Asher's jaw tightened. So the sheriff did know something, just not enough. The younger man opened the back doors of the van. Inside sat medical equipment, stretchers, cooling units, storage containers that looked far too industrial for simple patient transport. Atlas's ears flattened slightly. Even injured, the dog recognized the scent drifting from the van. Fear, blood, hospital antiseptic, but no hospital. The men finished checking something in the cargo area before closing the doors again. Within minutes, the van rolled away. The clearing fell silent once more. Asher remained still for a long moment after the vehicle disappeared. Then he walked slowly back to the truck. Atlas followed close beside him. Neither of them spoke. But the truth had become impossible to ignore now. This was no small operation, and it had already taken people from their town. Asher climbed into the driver's seat and stared at the hospital bracelet resting in his palm. Grant Calder, one missing name among many. Atlas settled into the passenger seat again. The old dog's eyes remained fixed on the road ahead. Waiting. Ready. Asher started the engine. The quiet life he had built in these woods was finished now. And somewhere in the shadows of the northern forest, a man named Caldwell had just made a mistake he didn't yet understand. The drive back to the cabin felt longer than usual. The old pickup truck moved slowly along the gravel road as the northern woods stretched endlessly on both sides. Tall pines leaned toward the sky like silent witnesses, their shadows striping the road beneath the afternoon sun. Asher Wren kept one hand loosely on the steering wheel. In the other, he held the hospital bracelet. The thin band of plastic felt strangely heavy for something so small. J. Calder. Grant Calder had been a quiet man in town, a mechanic who spent most of his days fixing farm trucks and snowmobiles in a small garage near the lake. He had a thick gray beard and a slow voice that made even angry customers calm down. When people disappeared from small towns, they didn't vanish like strangers in big cities. They left empty chairs behind. Atlas sat upright in the passenger seat. The German shepherd's breathing was steadier than before, though the stiffness in his injured ribs was still obvious. The pain medication Mara had given him had dulled the worst of it, but not the instinct that kept his attention fixed on the world outside the truck window. His ears flicked occasionally. Listening, always listening. Asher glanced at him briefly. "You smell them too, don't you?" Atlas blinked slowly. That was enough. When the cabin finally appeared through the trees, the late afternoon sun had begun sliding toward the western hills. Smoke rose from the chimney. Asher slowed the truck. June Halbrook was sitting on the porch in the old wooden chair beside the door. She looked smaller than usual beneath the wool blanket draped around her shoulders, but her silver hair moved gently in the breeze as she watched the road. Atlas jumped down from the truck carefully and walked toward her. June reached down immediately, her thin hand resting on the dog's head. "You went hunting trouble again," she murmured. Atlas leaned slightly into the touch. Asher climbed the porch steps. June studied his face quietly. "You found something." He handed her the bracelet. The moment she read the name, her expression changed. "Oh no." Her voice faded. "You know him," Asher said. "Everyone knows Grant Calder," she whispered. June looked toward the trees beyond the clearing. "He helped Owen fix my roof after the winter storm 6 years ago." The name Owen hung in the air for a moment. Atlas shifted slightly beside her chair. Asher leaned against the railing. "I saw their van." June looked up sharply. "You're sure? Same company name you heard." A long silence followed, then June said something quietly. "If they're moving people through those woods, there must be somewhere they take them." That thought had already begun forming in Asher's mind. "Tonight," he said. June frowned. "What about tonight? I heard them say another pickup was scheduled." Her eyes widened slightly. "You're going after them." It wasn't a question. Evening came slowly across the northern valley. The sky deepened into a soft blue that eventually faded toward violet as the sun disappeared behind the hills. The forest darkened gradually, each tree turning into a tall shadow as the air cooled. Inside the cabin, the lights were dim. Maribel had returned shortly before sunset to check Atlas again. She knelt beside the dog now, examining the wrapped wound along his shoulder. "He shouldn't be running around forests," she muttered. Atlas lifted his head slightly. Mara sighed. "I know that look." Asher stood near the kitchen table, studying a map spread across the wood. The paper was old and creased, showing logging roads and service trails most modern GPS systems ignored. "There's only one route they can use without crossing the highway," he said. Mara looked up. "You're serious about this?" "Yes," her hazel eyes narrowed slightly. "You planning to tell the sheriff?" "Eventually." "That's not an answer." Before Asher could respond, the screen door opened quietly. A tall man stepped inside. Sheriff Daniel Kincaid removed his hat as he entered the cabin. He was in his early 50s, broad-shouldered with graying hair cut short above a weathered face. The years had etched deep lines around his mouth, the kind carved by long winters and harder decisions. His uniform jacket hung slightly open, revealing a faded blue shirt beneath it, and his presence filled the small room with a steady authority that didn't need to be announced. But his eyes told the deeper story. They were tired. Sheriffs in rural counties rarely slept well. "I figured you might be here," Kincaid said. Asher didn't look surprised. "You followed Mara." Mara raised her hand slightly. "He called me first." Kincaid nodded once. "Fair enough." His gaze moved to Atlas. "Hell of a dog." Atlas watched him quietly but didn't move. Kincaid stepped closer to the table. "What did you find in those woods?" Asher slid the hospital bracelet across the table. The sheriff studied it carefully. His jaw tightened. "I knew something was wrong with those transport logs," he said quietly. Mara crossed her arms. "You've been investigating them already?" Kincaid nodded slowly. 3 missing patients in 6 weeks. The room went silent. Atlas suddenly stood. The movement was abrupt enough that everyone looked toward him. The German shepherd walked slowly to the door. He sniffed the air once. Then his body stiffened. A low growl rolled quietly from his chest. Asher moved to the window. Far down the road, through the trees, headlights appeared. White headlights, approaching the ridge. Atlas's growl deepened slightly. Sheriff Kincaid's voice dropped. "Tell me that's not—" Asher didn't answer, because they all already knew what it was. The white van moved slowly along the road below the ridge. Even from a distance, the logo on its side was visible beneath the headlights. Caldwell Transit Medical. The vehicle slowed near the lower fork of the road. Kincaid stepped beside Asher. "Looks like tonight's pickup came early." Mara whispered softly. "My God." Atlas's tail lowered slightly as he watched the road. He didn't bark. Working dogs rarely wasted noise when danger approached. Asher turned from the window. "If they're heading toward a town, they're moving someone." Kincaid nodded grimly. "And if we stop them now, we might finally see what's inside those vans." He adjusted the radio on his belt, but then he hesitated, because something about this moment was wrong. The van had stopped. Halfway down the road. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out and scanned the dark forest around him. Then the back doors opened. Another figure moved in the shadows behind the van. Asher felt the tension snap tight in his chest. "Something's not right." Atlas began barking, not loudly, but urgently. Sheriff Kincaid stepped toward the door. "Let's go." The white van did not belong on that road. Even from the cabin window, its headlights cut too cleanly through the trees, bright and cold against the natural darkness of the northern forest. The vehicle moved slowly along the gravel path that wound past the ridge, as if the driver knew exactly where he was going. Inside the cabin, the air had grown tense. Atlas stood near the door, his body rigid despite the injuries that still slowed his movements. The German shepherd's black and tan coat rose slightly along his spine, the old instinct of a working dog telling him that the quiet outside had changed. His amber eyes stayed fixed on the road beyond the porch. Asher Wren reached for his jacket. The movement was calm and practiced. At 36, he had spent enough years in dangerous places to understand the difference between curiosity and necessity. This moment belonged to the second category. Sheriff Daniel Kincaid stood beside the table, his large frame casting a long shadow across the cabin floor. Up close, the sheriff looked older than his 52 years. the gray in his hair catching the lamplight as he adjusted the radio clipped to his belt. The long winters and lonely responsibilities of a rural sheriff's office had carved patience into him, but the tension in his shoulders revealed that he understood the weight of what they might be facing. "Stay behind me," he told Mara and June quietly. Maribel folded her arms, but didn't argue. The veterinarian had spent enough time around emergencies to recognize when a situation had passed the point of polite debate. Her hazel eyes moved from the window to Atlas and back again, studying the dog's reactions carefully. June Halbrook remained seated near the stove. Though her hands trembled slightly beneath the blanket around her shoulders, the old woman's eyes remained sharp. She had seen enough of life to know when fear deserved respect. Outside, the van stopped. The engine idled for several seconds. Then the driver's door opened. A man stepped out. He was tall and thick through the shoulders, his dark jacket hanging loosely over a broad frame that suggested years of physical work. The porch light reflected off the rough stubble along his jaw. Even from the cabin window, Asher noticed the tattoo on the man's wrist. An anchor. But the center had been scratched through with a thin line. The same symbol June had described. Another man stepped down from the passenger side. This one was younger, leaner, with pale hair and sharp eyes that scanned the tree line constantly as if expecting trouble to rise out of the darkness. Neither of them looked toward the cabin. Instead, they walked to the back of the van. The rear doors opened. From where Asher stood, he could see metal frames and equipment cases stacked inside. And something else. A stretcher. Atlas let out a low growl. The sound was quiet, but it carried through the room like a warning. Kincaid glanced at Asher. "That's them." Asher nodded. "Looks like they're early." The sheriff unholstered his pistol slowly. "Then we stop them now." They stepped onto the porch together. The night air felt colder than before. The forest around the cabin had gone completely silent, as if even the animals understood something dangerous had entered their territory. Asher moved down the steps first. Atlas followed immediately at his side. The dog's injured ribs slowed him slightly, but determination carried him forward anyway. Working dogs often ignored pain until the job was finished. Halfway down the path, the men near the van finally noticed them. The younger one stiffened first. "Hey!" His voice cut off when he saw the sheriff's badge catching the light. Kincaid's voice was calm but firm. "Hands where I can see them." The older man with the tattoo didn't move. For a second, the forest seemed to hold its breath. Then he laughed. "You got the wrong idea, officer." Asher kept walking. The man's eyes shifted toward him. Recognition flickered across his face. "You're that SEAL from town." The statement wasn't a guess. It was a warning. Atlas suddenly stepped forward, not aggressively, not attacking. Instead, the German Shepherd moved toward the open back of the van and lifted his nose into the air. The scent hit him instantly. Fear. Human fear. The kind that lingered in closed spaces where people had been trapped too long. Atlas's ears went rigid. Then he barked. Once, sharp, urgent. Asher's eyes snapped toward the van. Because Atlas never gave that signal unless someone inside was still alive. "Open it," Asher said quietly. The tattooed man's smile vanished. "You don't want to do that." Kincaid stepped closer. That wasn't a suggestion. The younger man suddenly moved. His hand darted toward his jacket. The sheriff reacted instantly. "Don't." The warning came too late. The man pulled a pistol halfway free before Atlas launched forward. Despite his injuries, the old German Shepherd moved with explosive speed. He hit the man square in the chest. The pistol fired once, the sound cracking through the forest like thunder. The bullet buried itself harmlessly in the dirt. Kincaid rushed forward and tackled the tattooed man before he could reach the van doors. The struggle lasted only seconds. Years of experience gave the sheriff the advantage he needed. By the time the younger man pushed Atlas away and scrambled backward, Asher already had him pinned against the side of the vehicle. "Easy," Asher warned quietly. The man froze, because there was something in Asher's voice that made resistance feel pointless. Kincaid cuffed the first man quickly, then he looked toward the van. "Let's see what they're hiding." Asher opened the rear doors. The smell hit them immediately. Cold air from the refrigeration unit spilled out into the forest. Inside, 2 metal stretchers sat strapped to the floor. One was empty. The other held a man whose face Asher recognized immediately. Grant called her. The mechanic's thick beard had grown longer since the last time anyone in town had seen him. His eyes were half open, unfocused, and an oxygen mask covered his mouth. But he was alive. Asher climbed into the van carefully and removed the restraints. "Grant," he said quietly. The man blinked weakly. "Took long enough," Calder rasped. Outside, Atlas stood beside the open doors. His breathing had grown heavy again, but his tail moved slowly for the first time that night. The job was not finished, but something had shifted. Kincaid pulled the second man to his feet and pushed him against the side of the van. "You're going to tell me where the rest of your operation is," the sheriff said. The man laughed nervously. "You have no idea what you just walked into." Kincaid leaned closer. "Try me." Asher helped bide Grant down from the stretcher. The mechanic's legs nearly gave out, but Atlas stepped close beside him instinctively, steadying him as if he understood the man needed support. The forest around them slowly began to breathe again. Crickets returned. Wind moved through the pines. The silence of the northern woods had ended the way it always did when truth finally surfaced, with patience and with witnesses who refused to look away. Asher glanced at Atlas. The old German shepherd met his gaze calmly. For a moment, Asher thought of Owen Halbrook, the friend who had once trusted this same dog with his life. Tonight, that trust had saved another. Sometimes the world changes not because of loud heroes or dramatic miracles, but because one loyal heart refuses to give up. In this story, it was not strength, wealth, or power that saved a life. It was the quiet loyalty of an old German shepherd who refused to abandon the woman he loved, and the courage of a man who chose to step forward when it would have been easier to walk away. Moments like this remind us of something deeper than coincidence. Many people would call it luck, but others recognize it as something greater. Sometimes God works through the most unexpected messengers. A wounded dog, a quiet man who once carried the weight of war, a simple decision to help instead of turning away. Faith does not always appear in churches or sermons. Sometimes it appears in the form of loyalty, compassion, and the courage to protect someone who cannot protect themselves. The truth is that every day we pass people who are struggling silently. Every day we are given small chances to choose kindness, courage, or indifference. And sometimes those small choices become the miracle someone else was praying for. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect on the people in your own life. Think about the quiet acts of loyalty, the moments when someone stood beside you when you needed it most. Share this story with someone who believes in faith, loyalty, and the goodness that still exists in this world. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from and what this story meant to you. Your words may encourage someone who needs hope today. And if you believe that stories like this remind us that goodness still matters, consider subscribing to this channel so we can continue sharing stories of courage, compassion, and redemption. May God bless you and your family. May He protect your home, guide your path, and bring peace to your heart wherever you are watching from today.